Welcome to History for the Night, a journey into the past designed to lull you into restful sleep with fascinating tales. Please subscribe and like, as by the end of this lecture, you'll likely be drifting off. Close your eyes. The story begins. For centuries, humanity has feared creatures that return from the dead. The vampire, perhaps the most vivid and terrifying embodiment of this fear, has evolved from a figure of genuine dread to a staple of modern novels, films, and TV shows. In ancient times, people genuinely believed in vampires, blaming them for diseases, epidemics, and misfortunes. Bodies were buried with extreme caution to prevent their return, reflecting a deep-seated fear of the undead. Why did this fear of vampires take such a strong hold on the human psyche? Blood, a symbol of life and vitality, was both sacred and terrifying. Creatures that drank blood threatened existence itself. Psychologists suggest that vampire myths stem from a primal fear of losing vitality and control, while mythologists argue they were humanity's attempt to explain the unexplainable, sudden deaths, plagues, and the mysteries of the afterlife. Across cultures, blood-drinking entities emerged independently, sharing core traits, a connection to death and nocturnal activity. This lecture traces the vampire's evolution through cultures and eras, from Slavic and Romanian myths to the historical figure of Vlad the Impaler, the inspiration for Dracula, and the real-life rituals and investigations aimed at stopping these creatures. The vampire phenomenon is older than most realize, rooted in humanity's earliest civilizations. In ancient Sumer, in Mesopotamia, people believed in spirits like Ekimu and Itaku, ghostly remnants of the dead who roamed at night, seeking the life force of the living. These were not mere symbols, but perceived as real threats, countered with rituals and incantations. I'd add that Sumerian texts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, hint at such fears, tying the undead to humanity's existential dread of mortality. In ancient Egypt, bloodthirsty beings intertwined with mythology and history. The goddess Sekhmet, a lion-headed deity and daughter of Ra, embodies this fear. According to myth, humanity's rebellion angered the gods, prompting Ra to unleash Sekhmet. With ferocious cruelty, she slaughtered humans, drinking their blood until humanity teetered on extinction. Ra, horrified by her rampage, tricked her by flooding fields with red-dyed beer, which she mistook for blood. Drunk, Sekhmet fell asleep, sparing humanity. This tale highlights blood as a symbol of life and death, a theme central to vampire lore. Sekhmet's bloodlust mirrors later vampire traits, an insatiable thirst, supernatural power, and the need for cunning defenses. These ancient stories reveal why vampires became enduring cultural icons, reflecting humanity's deepest fears of divine wrath, disease, and mortality. Having explored the ancient origins of vampirism, we now journey to Greece and Rome, where blood-drinking creatures took on darker, more human-like traits. Unlike the demonic entities of the Near East, these beings had tragic, complex personalities, laying the groundwork for modern vampire archetypes. In Greek mythology, Impusa, a servant of the goddess Hecate, was a shape-shifting demon who appeared as a beautiful woman to lure travelers, only to drain their blood and life force. These tales reflected fears of the unknown dangers lurking on dark roads, where death awaited the unwary. I'd note that Impusa's seductive guise prefigures the romanticized vampires of later literature, blending allure with terror. More poignant is the story of Lamia, once a beautiful Libyan queen and lover of Zeus. Jealous, Hera killed Lamia's children, driving her mad with grief. Her despair turned to monstrous rage, and she began hunting others' children, drinking their blood to ease her pain. Transformed into a demoness, Lamia could disguise herself as a woman to stalk her prey. This tragic figure embodies not just supernatural horror, but the profound fear of losing loved ones, who might return as vengeful monsters. Lamia's story, found in texts like those of Philostratus, underscores the emotional depth of Greek vampire myths. In Roman mythology, the Strix, a monstrous bird with huge claws, preyed on infants, drinking their blood. Romans believed Strixes roamed at night, stealing children's vitality. Protective rituals, including amulets and incantations, were used to ward them off. The term Strix later evolved into Strigoi, the vampire of Eastern Europe, showing the myth's lasting impact. I'd add that Roman poet Ovid's Fasti mentioned Strixes, linking them to witchcraft and nocturnal terror, further embedding these creatures in cultural memory. These ancient figures, Impusa, Lamia, and Strix, introduced key vampire traits: seduction, nocturnal attacks, blood drinking, and tragic origins. They became prototypes for later European myths, shaping the vampire's enduring presence in global folklore. As we move to Slavic traditions, we'll see how these myths intertwined with everyday fears and rituals, creating the gruesome image of the Vrtilak. In Slavic culture, vampirism took on vivid, terrifying forms, epitomized by the Vrtilak, a far cry from the elegant vampires of modern media. The Vrtilak was a grotesque, unkempt corpse that rose from the grave to torment and kill its kin, disrupting village life. Slavs believed Vrtilaks were born from unclean deaths, suicides, executed criminals, victims of disease, or those who died violently. People cursed in life or buried without proper rites were also at risk. This fear led to elaborate burial practices to prevent the dead from rising. To stop a Vrtilak, bodies were buried face down to disorient them, or stones were placed in their mouths, heavy slabs on their chests, or aspen stakes driven through their hearts, symbolic acts to anchor them in the grave. Archaeological finds across Eastern Europe confirm these practices, revealing the depth of these fears. I'd add that such burials, like those found in Poland's vampire graves, often included decapitation or iron sickles to ensure the dead stayed dead. Slavs believed Vrtilaks returned at night, calling out in human voices to be led into their former homes. Those who opened the door faced disease, death, or transformation into monsters. This element made Slavic vampire tales uniquely chilling, blending familial betrayal with supernatural horror. These beliefs weren't mere folklore. They spurred real action. In 1726, the Serbian village of Medveda witnessed the famous case of Arnold Pole. After Pole's death, villagers died of a mysterious illness, prompting fears he'd returned as a Vrtilak. Austrian authorities investigated, exhuming Pole's body, which reportedly showed no decay and had fresh blood on its lips. To quell panic, his body was staked and burned, as were other suspicious corpses. This case, widely reported in 18th century Europe, marked one of the first official vampire investigations. The Vrtilak reflected everyday fears of death, disease, and the unknown, far from the romanticized vampires of today. These stories, grounded in real rituals and documented events, show how deeply vampirism was woven into Slavic life. Next, we'll explore Romanian Strigoi, where vampire myths gained unique, vivid traits amid a backdrop of war and plague. Romania, a land of cultural crossroads, wars, and epidemics, birthed the Strigoi, vampires far more than mere blood drinkers. Strigoi were reanimated corpses or cursed souls, returning to torment their families. Believed to arise from evil, cruel, or prematurely deceased individuals, Strigoi possessed supernatural powers, shape-shifting into animals, controlling weather, or causing disease. This myth thrived in villages where sudden illness, death, or crop failure was blamed on Strigoi curses, embedding fear into daily life. Romanian folklore is rich with Strigoi tales, like the night of the Strigoi's return. In a remote village, a greedy, cruel miller died. Fearing he'd become a Strigoi, villagers watched for 3 nights. On the third, a full moon brought howling winds and barking dogs, signaling his return. Panicked, residents hung garlic on doors and windows. Only the village blacksmith, armed with an aspen stake and iron cross, dared confront the creature. At the cemetery, he saw the miller's grave stir, revealing a pale, fiery-eyed corpse. Overcoming fear, the blacksmith staked its heart, ending the threat. Such stories, passed down generations, reinforced protective rituals and belief in Strigoi. I'd add that Romania's Strigoi myths were amplified by its turbulent history. Ottoman invasions and plague outbreaks fueled paranoia, making Strigoi a scapegoat for unexplained tragedies. Folklorists like Mircea Eliade note that Strigoi embodied Romania's struggle with chaos, blending Christian and pagan elements in rituals like garlic and stakes. Strigoi weren't just folklore. They shaped collective memory. Villagers conducted real exhumations, burning or staking bodies to stop supposed Strigoi. These practices, documented into the 19th century, show how deeply fear permeated Romanian culture. The Strigoi's vivid imagery and supernatural powers set the stage for the most famous vampire of all, Dracula, inspired by a real historical figure. Next, we'll meet Vlad the Impaler, whose brutal reign became the foundation for Bram Stoker's iconic creation. When we think of Dracula, we envision Bram Stoker's brooding vampire. Yet, behind this fictional icon lies a real man, Vlad III, ruler of Wallachia, born in 1431 in Transylvania's Sighisoara, known as Dracula, meaning son of the dragon from his father's order of the dragon. Vlad earned a darker moniker, Impaler, or Impaler, for his brutal tactics. His life, steeped in violence and political strife, shaped the legend. Vlad's childhood was harsh. Sent as a hostage to the Ottoman court, he faced constant threats, forging a distrustful, ruthless personality. Returning to Wallachia, he ruled a principality caught between the Ottoman Empire and Hungary. To maintain power, Vlad wielded fear as a weapon, perfecting impalement, a gruesome execution method. In 1462, facing an Ottoman invasion, he impaled 20,000 captives, creating a forest of stakes that horrified and repelled the enemy. Internally, he crushed dissent, once impaling disloyal boyars after a feast. I'd add that Vlad's cruelty, while shocking, was strategic. In the Balkans' cutthroat politics, fear deterred betrayal and invasion. Chronicles, like those by Michael Behem, exaggerate his atrocities, but they cemented his terrifying reputation. Vlad wasn't a vampire, but his blood-soaked legacy made him a perfect prototype. Bram Stoker, in his 1897 novel Dracula, transformed Vlad into a Gothic vampire, drawing from William Wilkinson's An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia and Eastern European Folklore. Stoker crafted a charismatic yet monstrous count. He also wove in Irish myths of the Dirge Dhu, a vengeful, blood-drinking woman, adding romantic tragedy. Never visiting Romania, Stoker relied on travelers' tales, painting Transylvania as a mystical land of superstition, perfect for his Gothic tale. Vlad's historical terror, blended with folklore and Stoker's imagination, birthed an enduring cultural icon. Next, we'll explore the 18th century vampire hysteria, where fear of the undead gripped Europe, prompting official investigations and scientific inquiries. The 18th century marked the peak of what historians call the vampire hysteria, a phenomenon that transformed local fears into a Europe-wide obsession. Across Eastern Europe and the Balkans, villagers exhumed graves, staked corpses, and burned bodies to halt a supposed vampire epidemic. This wasn't mere superstition. It reflected deep societal anxieties during a time of upheaval. The Enlightenment era, despite its focus on reason, was rife with disease and uncertainty. Plagues, tuberculosis, and unexplained deaths were common. And without scientific understanding, people turned to the supernatural. Vampires became the perfect scapegoat for these mysteries, blamed for spreading illness and death. On the Balkans, where medical knowledge was scarce, every sudden death fueled panic, leading to mass exhumations. I'd add that this hysteria coincided with the Great Northern War and Ottoman conflicts, which destabilized regions, amplifying fears of the unknown. The panic grew so intense that European authorities intervened. Empress Maria Theresa issued decrees banning unauthorized grave exhumations, fearing they incited disorder. One pivotal figure in this era was Augustin Calmet, a French Benedictine monk and scholar. In 1746, he published a treatise on the apparitions of spirits and on vampires, aiming to rationally analyze vampire reports. Calmet collected eyewitness accounts, studied official records, and attended exhumations. While he sought scientific explanations, his work backfired, fueling fascination rather than dispelling it. His book, a bestseller translated across Europe, lent credibility to vampire fears, as readers were struck by a scholar's reluctance to fully deny their existence. Calmet's treatise highlighted cases like bodies found undecayed, often due to natural preservation or diseases like tuberculosis, which caused pale, wasting victims, mistaken for vampire attacks. I'd note that Comet's work influenced Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, who mocked vampire superstitions but acknowledged their grip on the public. The hysteria revealed a clash between emerging science and ancient fears, making vampires a cultural lightning rod. As we move forward, we'll explore how these fears led to real vampire hunts, official investigations, and even specialized tools for combating the undead. The vampire hysteria of the 18th century wasn't confined to folklore. It spurred real-world actions, from village rituals to government inquiries. Fear of the undead led to organized vampire hunts, with communities and even authorities taking drastic measures to protect themselves. Villagers across Eastern Europe developed grim rituals to identify and destroy vampires. Suspected corpses were exhumed, often showing signs like bloating or blood at the mouth. Natural post-mortem changes, mistaken for vampirism. Bodies were staked, decapitated, or burned to prevent their return. These acts, documented in places like Serbia and Poland, weren't just superstition but desperate attempts to explain rampant diseases. I'd add that archaeological discoveries, such as Bulgaria's vampire skeletons with iron rods through their chests, confirm the widespread nature of these practices. Official involvement elevated the phenomenon. The 1726 case of Arnold Pole in Serbia, mentioned earlier, saw Austrian officials investigate claims of vampirism after villagers died mysteriously. The exhumation report, detailing Pole's undecayed body, was published across Europe, fueling panic. Similar cases followed, with authorities reluctantly sanctioning exhumations to quell unrest. In 1755, Empress Maria Theresa's physician, Gerard van Swieten, investigated vampire reports, concluding they were due to ignorance and disease, leading to stricter laws against grave tampering. The era also saw the rise of vampire hunter kits, ornate cases sold to wealthy Europeans. These contained aspen stakes, holy water, crucifixes, and even silver bullets, items popularized by folklore and later fiction. I'd note that museums like the Royal Armories in Leeds display such kits, highlighting their blend of superstition and craftsmanship. These tools reflected a society grappling with fear, where even the elite invested in supernatural defenses. The persistence of these beliefs set the stage for later vampire panics, including 19th and 20th century cases, where police investigated alleged undead activity. As science advanced, the supernatural explanations for vampirism gave way to medical insights, revealing how diseases shaped these myths. Conditions like porphyria, tuberculosis, and rabies were key culprits, their symptoms eerily aligning with vampire traits. Porphyria, a rare metabolic disorder, caused extreme light sensitivity, leading to skin burns and scars. Sufferers appeared pale, with receding gums exposing teeth like fangs, and avoided daylight, earning suspicion as vampires. In medieval times, such individuals were often persecuted, their conditions seen as proof of the undead. I'd add that porphyria's link to vampirism was popularized in the 1980s by biochemist David Dolphin, though some argue it overstates the connection. Tuberculosis, or consumption, was another major driver. Its victims grew pale, weak, and coughed blood, symptoms that seemed to drain life, perfectly fitting vampire lore. Entire families succumbed, leading communities to blame deceased relatives, prompting exhumations. Bodies not fully decomposed, due to cold climates or quick burials, reinforced these fears. Rabies, with its aggressive behavior, light sensitivity, and biting, also fueled myths. Infected individuals acted erratically, spreading disease, which villagers interpreted as a curse. A striking case occurred in 1892 in Exeter, Rhode Island, with the Brown family. After the mother and daughter died, young Edwin fell ill, coughing and wasting away. Locals suspected 19-year-old Mercy Brown, recently deceased, was a vampire. Despite doctors' objections, her body was exhumed. Preserved by winter cold, her heart held fresh blood, confirming suspicions. Her heart was burned, and the ashes fed to Edwin. But he died. Tuberculosis, not vampirism, was the cause. This case, widely reported, became America's last major vampire panic, showing how medical ignorance drove tragedy. These diseases explain why vampire myths persisted. setting the stage for modern interpretations of vampirism. Far from fading into history, vampire myths have evolved into a modern subculture, where individuals identify as real vampires, seeking blood or psychic energy. This phenomenon, thriving in cities like New Orleans and London, challenges the notion that vampirism is mere folklore. Modern vampires form organized communities, gathering at clubs, conferences, and events like the annual Vampire Ball in New Orleans. Some claim a physical need to consume small amounts of human blood, sourced from willing donors under strict medical protocols. This practice, far from violent, is seen as a way to gain vitality. Others identify as energy vampires, feeding on emotions like fear or admiration to feel energized. I'd add that sociologist Joseph Laycock's studies describe these groups as seeking identity and community, often using vampirism as a metaphor for personal struggles. Science attributes blood drinking to the Renfield syndrome, a psychological disorder named after Dracula's servant, where individuals obsessively crave blood, believing it grants strength or immortality. Psychologists link this to trauma or emotional needs, viewing it as a coping mechanism. Energy vampirism, meanwhile, is recognized as a social dynamic, where certain personalities drain others emotionally, a concept explored in psychology texts like those by Albert Bernstein. These communities emphasize consent, safety, and tolerance, distancing themselves from violence. Their rituals, from blood exchanges to psychic feeding, serve as self-expression and therapy. I'd note that media like Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles and shows like True Blood have fueled this subculture, romanticizing vampires as misunderstood outsiders. Modern vampirism reflects humanity's ongoing fascination with the undead, blending ancient fears with contemporary identity. Next, we'll explore how these myths continue to shape culture and psychology. Our journey through vampire history, from ancient demons to modern subcultures, reveals a timeless fascination. Vampires are more than monsters. They're mirrors reflecting humanity's fears, hopes, and attempts to grapple with the unknown. From Sumerian spirits to Greek lamia, Slavic vertilax, and Romanian Strigoi, vampire myths arose to explain disease, death, and betrayal. Vlad the Impaler's brutal reign inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, blending history with folklore to create a cultural icon. The 18th century hysteria, fueled by plagues and ignorance, saw villages and authorities battle imagined undead, while medical discoveries later demystified these fears. Today, vampire subcultures show the myth's adaptability, offering identity and meaning in a complex world. Vampires endure because they embody universal anxieties, mortality, loss of control, and the allure of immortality. I'd add that psychoanalytic theorists like Ernest Jones view vampires as symbols of repressed desires, from sexuality to rebellion, explaining their appeal in literature and film. From Nosferatu to Twilight, vampires evolve, reflecting each era's values and fears. This history shows humanity's need to confront the unknown through storytelling. Whether as gods, corpses, or modern outcasts, vampires remain potent symbols. As you drift off, consider how these tales, born from ancient dread, still shape our dreams and nightmares. Thank you for joining this lecture, and until next time, sleep well. While vampire fears seem to wane with scientific progress, the 20th century saw surprising resurgences, proving the myth's enduring grip. One of the most bizarre cases was the Highgate vampire. In 1970s London, a modern urban legend that captivated the public and baffled authorities. In North London's Highgate Cemetery, a Gothic necropolis, residents reported eerie sightings starting in 1970. Witnesses described a tall, pale figure in a dark cloak with glowing eyes, drifting among graves or vanishing into shadows. Some claimed it levitated. Panic spread, fueled by media frenzy and occult fascination. Locals, convinced a vampire haunted the cemetery, demanded action. The Metropolitan Police launched an investigation, patrolling the grounds and interviewing witnesses. They considered theories of a prankster or cultist, but found no evidence, closing the case unresolved. The Highgate vampire became a cultural phenomenon, drawing amateur vampire hunters and occultists. Rival factions, led by figures like David Farrant and Sean Manchester, claimed to hunt the creature, staging rituals and media stunts. I'd add that this case, detailed in Manchester's book The Highgate Vampire, reflected post-war Britain's fascination with the supernatural, amplified by horror films like Dracula, 1958. It showed how urban settings could revive ancient fears, blending folklore with modern paranoia. Other 20th century cases echoed this. In 1854, Connecticut's Jewett City saw a vampire panic when a mysterious illness killed villagers. Exhumed bodies, undecayed, were burned to stop supposed vampires, a ritual sanctioned by local authorities. These events, reported in state archives, highlight how even industrialized societies clung to vampire explanations for unexplained deaths. The Highgate case and others show vampirism's adaptability, thriving in modern contexts as a symbol of fear and mystery. Next, we'll explore how literature and media shaped the vampire's evolution. The vampire's modern image owes much to Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, which transformed a historical figure and scattered myths into a global icon. Stoker's creation wasn't just a monster, but a complex character, blending terror, allure, and tragedy. Stoker drew inspiration from Vlad the 15th century Wallachian prince known as Dracula, whose brutal impalements earned him infamy. Stoker found Vlad's name in William Wilkinson's An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, 1820. But his character was more than history. He wove in Eastern European folklore about Strigoi and Vertilax, creatures that drank blood and haunted villages. Stoker also tapped Irish myths, like the Dirge Dhu, a betrayed woman who rose to drink blood, adding romantic depth to his vampire. Never visiting Romania, Stoker relied on travelers' tales and Victorian fascination with exotic Eastern Europe, crafting Transylvania as a land of dark superstition. His Dracula, a charismatic aristocrat with supernatural powers, embodied fears of foreign influence and repressed desires, resonating with Victorian anxieties. I'd add that scholars like Nina Auerbach argue Dracula reflected concerns about immigration and sexuality, making him a multifaceted symbol. Dracula's impact was immense, spawning countless adaptations and shaping vampire lore. It introduced tropes like steaks, garlic, and sunlight vulnerability, now genre staples. Stoker's novel bridged folklore and modern storytelling, paving the way for later works like Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. Its blend of history, myth, and psychology ensured the vampire's place in global culture, setting the stage for cinema's embrace of the undead. From literature, vampires leapt to the screen, becoming pop culture titans. Cinema amplified their allure, transforming them from folkloric monsters to complex figures, reflecting societal fears and desires. The 1922 silent film Nosferatu, an unauthorized Dracula adaptation, introduced Count Orlok, a grotesque, rat-like vampire. Its shadowy visuals and plague metaphors captured post-World War I dread. In 1931, Bela Lugosi's Dracula redefined the vampire as a suave, seductive aristocrat, cementing the image of the charismatic undead. Lugosi's performance, with its hypnotic stare and accent, made vampires glamorous, influencing decades of portrayals. The 1950s, 70s saw Hammer Films' Dracula series, with Christopher Lee as a commanding, sensual count. These films, drenched in Gothic atmosphere, mirrored Cold War fears of infiltration and moral decay. I'd add that Hammer's vivid colors and erotic undertones, as noted by critic David Peary, made vampires symbols of forbidden desire, appealing to repressed audiences. Later, Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, adapted into 1994's Interview with the Vampire, humanized vampires. Characters like Lestat and Lewis, played by Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, were tortured souls, reflecting existential angst and identity struggles. The 2000s brought Twilight, where Stephenie Meyer's sparkling vampires became teen idols, symbolizing idealized romance but sparking debate over diluted horror. TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and True Blood further diversified vampires, blending humor, romance, and social commentary. Vampires remain cultural chameleons, adapting to each era's anxieties, disease, sexuality, or identity. Their cinematic evolution underscores their role as mirrors of human nature, leading us to explore their psychological roots. Vampire myths resonate because they tap into deep psychological fears and desires, serving as metaphors for human struggles. Psychoanalysis and anthropology reveal why these creatures haunt our collective imagination. Sigmund Freud's theories suggest vampires embody repressed desires, particularly sexual ones. Their biting, a blend of intimacy and violence, symbolizes forbidden passions, especially in Victorian-era tales like Dracula. Carl Jung saw vampires as archetypes of the shadow, the dark, unacknowledged side of the psyche. Their immortality reflects humanity's fear of death and yearning for eternal life, a theme echoed in myths from Sumer to Twilight. Anthropologists like Paul Barber, in Vampires, Burial, and Death, argue that vampire lore arose to explain decomposition anomalies, undecayed bodies, or blood at the mouth, caused by natural processes, were misread as signs of the undead, especially during plagues. This gave communities a scapegoat for grief and fear, with rituals like staking providing closure. I'd add that sociologist Catherine Ramsland notes vampires also represent societal others, outsiders, feared for their difference. From medieval lepers to modern subcultures, modern psychology links vampirism to conditions like Renfield syndrome, where individuals crave blood, often due to trauma or identity issues. Energy vampirism, where people drain others' emotions, reflects narcissistic or codependent traits, common in dysfunctional relationships. These concepts show how vampire myths externalize inner conflicts, from fear of loss to the allure of power. As we move to modern subcultures, we'll see how these psychological roots manifest in real-world vampire communities. Modern vampire subcultures, far from fictional, reveal how ancient myths adapt to contemporary needs. These communities, flourishing in cities like New York and Paris, offer insight into identity, belonging, and the human search for meaning. Participants in these subcultures identify as sanguine, blood-drinking, or psychic, energy-absorbing vampires. Sanguine vampires consume small amounts of donated blood, following strict safety protocols, believing it boosts vitality. Psychic vampires feed on emotional energy, often through intense social interactions. Both groups form tight-knit communities, hosting events like the Endless Night Vampire Ball in New Orleans, where members find acceptance. These subcultures aren't about violence, but self-expression. Many members, as studied by sociologist D.J. Williams, use vampirism to cope with feelings of alienation or past trauma, finding community among like-minded individuals. I'd add that these groups draw inspiration from media like The Vampire Diaries, which portrays vampires as misunderstood outsiders, resonating with those feeling marginalized. Critics view these practices through a psychological lens, linking blood drinking to Renfield's syndrome or energy vampirism to emotional dependency. Yet, participants emphasize consent and ethics, advocating for tolerance. Their rituals, from blood sharing to energy work, mirror ancient protective rites, showing continuity with past beliefs. These subcultures highlight vampirism's role as a lens for exploring identity, community, and the eternal human quest to transcend mortality, tying back to the myths we've traced across centuries. While European vampires like Strigoi and Dracula dominate popular imagination, blood-drinking creatures appear in global folklore, revealing universal fears of death and the supernatural. Exploring these non-European myths enriches our understanding of the vampire's enduring appeal. In African folklore, the Asambisam of Ganazakan people is a fearsome creature with iron teeth, dwelling in forests and drinking blood from unsuspecting travelers. Unlike European vampires, it's a monstrous entity, not a reanimated corpse, reflecting fears of nature's dangers. I'd add that anthropologist John Biddy notes such myths often serve to enforce social norms, warning against straying from community safety. In Asia, China's Jiangshi, or hopping vampire, is a stiff, reanimated corpse that drains life force, often depicted with outstretched arms. Rooted in Qing dynasty burial practices, Jiangshi tales warned of improper funerals, blending Buddhist and Taoist beliefs. In the Philippines, the manananggal detaches its upper body to fly and feed on blood, especially from pregnant women, embodying fears of betrayal and hidden evil. Folklorist Maximo Ramos links these stories to colonial anxieties. The Americas also have vampire-like beings. The Tlahuelpuchi of Mexico's Tlaxcala region is a shape-shifting, which that drinks blood, often targeting infants. Unlike European vampires, it's a living person cursed with bloodlust, reflecting community distrust. These global myths, while distinct, share themes of life-draining and nocturnal terror, paralleling European lore. I'd note that anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss argues such stories universalize human fears of mortality and the unknown, making vampires a global archetype. These diverse tales highlight vampirism's adaptability, setting the stage for its modern media evolution. Vampires have conquered modern media, from films to video games, adapting to new formats while retaining their core allure. Gaming, in particular, has transformed vampires into interactive icons, blending horror, strategy, and role-playing. The 1990s game Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines immersed players in a dark urban world where vampires navigate clan politics and bloodlust. Its rich narrative, based on the tabletop RPG, let players embody vampires, balancing humanity and monstrous urges. I'd add that game scholar Jesper Juhl praises its storytelling, which mirrors the moral ambiguity of Anne Rice's novels. More recent titles like The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, and Bloodstained: Ritual of the Night feature vampire characters or mechanics, emphasizing power and seduction. In Skyrim, players can become vampires, gaining abilities but facing sunlight weaknesses, echoing folklore. Mobile games like Vampire's Fall Origins offer accessible vampire adventures, reflecting the myth's broad appeal. I'd note that gaming critic Matt Kamen highlights how these games tap into player fantasies of immortality and control, key vampire themes. Beyond gaming, vampires thrive in streaming media. Shows like What We Do in the Shadows use humor to explore vampire domesticity, while Castlevania on Netflix blends anime and gothic horror, drawing from the classic game series. These portrayals keep vampires relevant, reflecting modern anxieties about identity and community. I'd add that media theorist Marshall McLuhan would argue that gaming's interactivity makes vampires more personal, letting players live the myth. This digital evolution ensures vampires remain cultural touchstones, leading to our final reflection on their legacy. Our journey through vampire history, from ancient Sumer to modern gaming, reveals a myth that transcends time and culture. Vampires are not just monsters. They're mirrors reflecting humanity's deepest fears, desires, and questions about existence. From Egypt's Sekhmet to Romania's Strigoi, vampires explain the unexplainable: disease, death, and betrayal. Vlad Tepes' brutal legacy inspired Dracula, blending history with fiction. The 18th century hysteria, driven by plagues, showed society grappling with science and superstition, while modern subcultures use vampirism to explore identity. Global myths, from Jiangshi to Tlahuelpuchi, universalize these fears, proving vampirism's cross-cultural resonance. In media, vampires evolve: Lugosi's Suave Count, Rice's Anguished Lestat, or Skyrim's playable undead, each reflecting its era's values. Psychologically, they embody repressed desires and mortality fears. As Freud and Jung suggest, I'd add that philosopher Slavoj Žižek sees vampires as symbols of capitalism's exploitative sucking of life, a modern metaphor for systemic greed. Vampires endure because they adapt, offering a lens for every generation to confront the unknown. Whether in folklore, film, or games, they challenge us to face our shadows and dream of immortality. As you drift to sleep, reflect on how these ancient tales still shape our stories and selves. Thank you for joining this exploration, and until next time, may your dreams be free of nocturnal visitors.